Here we are again. We're back with our daily live streams. And as you've probably all noticed, they haven't been daily for a while. I had a little bit of downtime last week, and I had some things to do. I don't mean to be cryptic, but they don't relate to this
Well, I told
podcast.
them about you running with the Metropolitan Police yesterday, so they kind of know.
Released without charge, you know.
Yes.
And so much has happened in the last week. I've just been sort of catching up, having unplugged to an extent from the daily flow of lunacy. I'll let you do your sort of plugs in a minute, but the theme I've given my thumbnail today is a question that we brought up actually right at the start of the war against Iran. And I posed the question, who does a long war benefit? And came to the conclusion that only Russia benefits from a protracted war because it keeps the price of oil high. And however intense or not intense the operations are, as long as they are maintaining uncertainty, as long as the straits are partially closed, as long as oil price doesn't dip down, this is benefiting Russia, not necessarily anybody else. China, not so much. You know, their manufacturing processes are costing more while this is going on. The US, citizens at least, not so much, because high oil price hurts the economy, hurts consumers, and so on. Only Russia benefits. So my prediction was that if Trump is acting either consciously or unconsciously on manipulation and guidance from Russia, then we are likely to see a protracted war without a clear resolution. I think we can safely say that we're in that territory now. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Jonathan, and welcome back. As folks know, I have my own channel, which is the No Delusion Zone. So I'd like folks to go there when they get a chance, become subscribers to the No Delusion Zone on YouTube, and then take a gander over at my Substack, which is protectingtherepublic.com. Become a subscriber there as well in the future. And I know we've got a lot to cover today. I was just saying to Jonathan off air, in the future, we're going to talk about my trials and travails in exposing security lapses at the headquarters of CENTCOM in Tampa, Florida, MacDill Air Force Base. The fact that I have been talking about that has apparently gotten through to them. And so they are, of course, retaliating against me. So we're going to get to that in the future. When MacDill and the Air Force retaliates against the messenger, we're going to talk about it here on the Dictators. Because why, Jonathan? This is coming from the dictator here in America. And he doesn't like negative news. So but that's for another time. Right now, we're talking about, of course, a disaster in the Persian Gulf, Iran, and some related issues. So, Jonathan, it's up to you.
There's so much, and we have to talk about the reputed or alleged assassination attempt and the absolute farce, surrounding that, whether it was genuine or not. And actually, to an extent, it's interesting because it serves several purposes. And again, without coming down on the side and saying it's genuine or it's not, it's staged or it's not, let's take a step back and say that actually it serves a particular purpose, whether it's incidentally or by design, and that is to provide narratives for division, to provide narratives to get everybody each other's throats again. A little bit reminds me of the Steele dossier. And whether, Trump's team and so on are being reactive to that and using it as a trigger to sort of push the ballroom and all the other narratives, or blaming, libs for violence, which is ironic because the majority of civic violence comes from those identifying it on the right. But hey, facts, but it doesn't really matter too much in the world we're living in. But whether it's intentional or not, this certainly serves a Russian purpose, which is the divide and conquer mechanic. It's perfectly suited to that.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, obviously, it's been all over the social media, all over the internet since it happened on Saturday. What do you think? I mean, as I did a podcast on this, and I said I'm not going to get into all the conspiracy theories. I'm not going to say whether or not I believe it was real, it was staged. I actually played a brief clip about with Caroline Levitt just before the dinner got started, where she said shots are going to be fired. I don't know what that was all about. I mean, that's incredible to say that.
The thing is, if it was staged, would she say that? Unless she is so hubristic, she'd not
crazy.
say that if she was in on the plot.
Anything past them. Yes, they would. What? I wasn't really prepared to get into the whole thing about the dinner, but let me play a brief clip, just half of it. It's about a minute long, and it talks about what we're talking about. And I'll let the viewers decide whether or not any of this is legitimate. This is by a security analyst who was talking, I'm not sure if it was CNN or NBC, about this, and it shows a brief clip of the alleged shooter as well. So just give me a minute here, folks. Take a look at this, and we'll talk about it.
I was perplexed even before the incident about what I saw on security. Matt Gutman just pointed out that nobody was checking IDs. My ID was not checked at any point in the evening. To get into the hotel, all I had to do was show a screenshot of an invitation.
And that crossed your mind initially?
Absolutely.
Before even walking into the ballroom?
I'll tell you what else I thought. Inside the room, security was not particularly close to the principals visibly. So the Secret Service agents who were visible were not very close to the president. There were more people behind that curtain. But as we saw, it took them time to react. Once the incident happened, it was a full 2 minutes or so before anyone came to get the Secretary of War.
What did Pete Hegseth do in that moment?
He was alert.
Nobody cares what Pete Hegseth was doing in that moment.
Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Was he above table or was he under the table? I mean,
well, he's always under the table, but that's when he's drinking, which is always. Look, I think a couple of key things in that brief interview. The IDs were not checked for anybody who entered the ballroom. They just kind of expected, well, you're with the press, right? You got one of those little badges. You must be okay. We don't care where it was made. The other thing that he said, which is true, is that there was no Secret Service anywhere close to the president, the vice president, and the Speaker of the House, the number 1, 2, and 3 people in line of succession for the United States government. This is insane. And not only that, he didn't say it on this clip, but the shooter was staying. He was a guest in the Hilton, the very hotel where this was taking place. And they didn't check his bags, knowing all the members of Congress, knowing the president and all these other dignitaries and officials were going to be there. They didn't do a scan. There wasn't a metal detector. They didn't go through anybody's luggage or suitcases. So he was able to bring in a disassembled shotgun or rifle, take it up to his room, reassemble it, come down to the lobby and sprint within a few dozen yards of the president, the vice president, and the Speaker of the House before shots were fired. He made it through at least the second ring of security and damn near close to the first. And one last thing I'll say, they're not sure yet, Secret Service, whether or not the Secret Service agent who was shot by this guy or by one of their own, because they were so perplexed, so excited about that. It was maybe a friendly fire. I don't know.
I'd heard that as well. Yeah,
the security is horrendous. I mean, just think about what he just said and what I just said about no IDs, about no security checks in the hotel, all of it.
Let's presume that it actually doesn't matter whether it was staged or not. You wouldn't have been able to include all of these agents and everyone in the plan, because you cannot leak a plan like that because someone will blab. So let's assume that whether it's staged or not, that almost no one on the security side would have been in on it. Therefore, they're reacting to what they believe is a genuine situation, and may well have been a genuine situation. This talks to an extraordinary lapse, and I find it mind-boggling. I remember seeing Bill Clinton, even when he wasn't president anymore, he came running. He visited Oxford, and he came running in the park. And you had vehicles all along the street checking every exit. You had several, service agents in kind of black jogging costumes.
Checking the manholes on the street, in the street.
They're checking everything. They're checking the manhole covers, every exit. They've staked out the whole park. And this is somebody who's not even, this is after office, being in office. I find this extraordinary. And then when you see the beast and the convoys and the very performative, like huge retinues, that would suggest to me extraordinary level of security. And then you see this absolute kind of dereliction. The same as the other assassination attempt with the guy on the roof. Again, you can debate till the cows come home about whether it was real or staged. And I know people who are very anti-Trump who believe it was real, and others who aren't so sure. But even then, that really raises the question of a massive security breach.
Well, Jonathan, the other thing that I don't know if you knew, you talked about the Beast, which for those that don't know, is the heavily armored vehicle that the president rides in, and there's some decoy vehicles as well. The Beast, which Trump was actually in before he entered the hotel, was outside before the dinner and allowing people in the crowd, not screened, to take selfies right there, right next to the Beast. They could have been human bombs for all he knew, or they knew. So, I mean, the lapse of security started well before anyone even entered the building. It's a disgrace.
I mean, that talks to a certain level of hubris as well as incompetence.
Yep.
Or I don't know. I mean, it suggests that there's an institutional or systemic laxity, which we know the people who's put in charge of these departments are clownish figures. But I would have presumed that some level of professional incompetence would have been there already, structurally, institutionally, despite the Kash Patels and all these other figures, that those institutions would not have rotted so fast, despite, the head, as it were, rotting like a fish rots from the head.
Well, I've always had the greatest of admiration and respect for all of these types of federal law enforcement agencies. We're talking now about the FBI and the Secret Service. I always had, until fairly recently, and specifically, Jonathan, the Secret Service in the United States has been the victim of some unfortunate accidents, not just with Trump, going back to Obama and Bush and so forth. I don't know what's going on over there. The screening, the vetting of agents perhaps has not been the best. Perhaps the level of supervision has been very, very lax. But I mean, I can't tell you how many stories there's been of Secret Service agents overseas and even here getting drunk, getting arrested, losing their badge, losing their weapons, being in domestic violence situations and arrested. I mean,
tops full of secrets.
Just
that's
not
happened over here a few times
stuff
as well.
So, when those things are happening repeatedly, not just a one-off, you have to wonder, okay, so how secure are the leaders of our country from the president on down, regardless of who's in the Oval Office? How secure are they if these people, who are out in drunken binges, in Buenos Aires and getting arrested for beating their wives? How good are they at protecting the president? Again, I still have a lot of respect for our law enforcement agencies in this country, but it's gone downhill. They're taking a lot of black eyes recently, so I don't know what's going on.
Well, if their minds are on booze and mistresses, they're probably not really thinking so much about the job. That's just a basic sort of statement of fact there, no matter how professional they are. Let's turn back to the phrase I launched this with, which is the long war favoring Russia. Let's dig into that a little bit, because a thumbnail today is all around that and about the straits being closed for a long period. Trump obviously using it as a stick to beat Europe. Now, whether that was pre-planned, I don't know, but certainly it's a convenient rod for him to bash Europe with. And Putin would have been gaining enormously from this operation had it not been for Ukrainian drone operations to shut down Russian oil. We've just seen, just putting an episode out later this afternoon, Tuapse, which essentially accounts for 10-12% of Russian oil refining and export capacity, looks like it's just about been taken offline permanently. Third strike in 12 days. It's burning out of control. Putin would have been gaining enormously from Trump's actions if it wasn't for Ukraine using extraordinary strategic reach and vision in preventing Putin from cashing in.
I agree. And like you said, you just did, I think, a couple of episodes about that. And I'm actually trying to find, I do have some photos or graphics about that latest file. I can't find it right away, but as soon as I find it, I'll put it up. But yeah, they have been hammering the Russian refineries, their oil and gas facilities. And so even though I think today Brent crude is $111 per barrel, it's way up. Russia's not seeing a lot of that. Their economy is here it is tanking. And like I said, you've just done a couple of episodes on that.
I've got another one coming this afternoon about that as well. Because again,
within 24 hours, this is a photo.
Yeah.
Of that facility. And in fact, as you know, Jonathan, this is the area where it's so bad. In fact, this is the third time this month that Ukraine has hit that location with drones. The people there are complaining about oil rain or black rain. Yes. It's not only affecting them, it's coating their pets. There's really horrific videos or photos of dogs and cats and birds and so forth that are just covered with this black oil. Children playing outside, their hands are covered with oil. Of course, I feel sorry for them, but this is going to put this facility out of business for a while. In fact, it polluted their river. This is creating an environmental disaster. But here's what I say about the people that live there. Stop the war. The Ukrainians have gone through far, far worse.
Yes, this is it, and we always have to point that out. And in fact, Ukraine is doing the only thing that curtails Russia's ability to wage war, and the only thing that has even the glimmer of possibility about making Putin think twice about imposing costs on the Russian people.
You just did a bunch of good segments on this. Mm-hmm. I just mentioned the price of oil is going up again, and it's not going to stop. How is the Russian economy doing? I mean, is this really helping them? Or is, in fact, the Russian economy still going to tank regardless of what happens to the price of oil and the war in Iran?
It's heading in that direction. The numbers are so catastrophically bad. Even if Ukraine hadn't sort of curtailed the profitability of Russian oil, I don't think it would have necessarily fixed the problem, but it would have provided a temporary sticking plaster for Putin. But he's not even getting that. He's not even getting that because this is taking a huge portion of Russian oil export offline. The estimate is it could be up to 40%, which essentially counters the price rise. But Ukraine's capability of deep strike and repeated deep strike on the same facilities is only going up. It is increasing. And I think the other bit that's going to be in this afternoon's episode is a quote from Budanov. I've pushed the two together because it seems that Budanov is now being very clear about the strategic purpose. And it's very heartening to read, because when he was appointed to be part of the chief negotiating team with Trump's so-called, peace initiative, various noises were made and some implications about how serious Ukraine was taking this. And I was a little concerned that might lead to extraordinary concessions, that may even lead to a ceasefire, which would allow Russia to rearm and allow Trump to really openly and at full scale help to replenish Russia's financial resources, ready to attack Europe. We'll come on to that one in a minute as well. The long-term plan, I think, is to try and enable the world order such as it is to break down so that Europe is unprotected and becomes under the strategic sphere of Russia. So there's all this sort of stuff going on. Budanov was very, very clear. He said there will be no territorial concessions. There will be no peace for land. There will be no people left behind. There will be no accommodation with thieves and criminals. And he didn't just make it as a statement, which European leaders are very good at making statements, not so good at putting physical actions behind it. He spelled out exactly how this is going to be enforced and said there is no world order now unless you're willing to back it up with force, that the weak have no voice in this new world order. That wasn't the case before, but with the US now absent, not just as the world policeman, but absent as any kind of moral authority, purely transactional, or even, say, focused on grift and self-interest of a small elite. There is no world order as such unless you're willing to enforce that with military force and back your values up with military force. and Ukraine is arming themselves to the teeth to not just survive but thrive in that dog-eat-cat world. Europe, I have to say, is not mentally and physically there yet. Some countries are moving ahead on both those fronts. Others, unfortunately, are making partial progress, but not really making the full transition, I would say, to the new world order, which is, if you believe in your values, then you need to quite literally get yourself absolutely armed up to the teeth to defend them.
Well, Ukraine has gone from allegedly not holding any cards to being the actual dealer at the table. As you know, and as many of our viewers know, they have been offering their services in both training and providing drones and anti-drone technology to the Middle East after Iran struck almost all of the Middle Eastern countries, either at their airports, their military bases, American bases, as well as their oil facilities, their refineries, as well as their desalination facilities. So Iran or Ukraine came over and stepped over and actually signed a huge agreement with Saudi Arabia to provide them with drones and training. In fact, I want to play a brief clip. I got all kinds of stuff. I'm not going to play it now about Ukraine and how far they've come in developing drone warfare, anti-drone warfare. Here's a very brief, under a minute clip about how Ukraine. No, maybe the inside. Nope, this is the wrong one. Hold on, don't go anywhere.
Okay.
This is
Hold your horses.
The Shaddux drone developed by Ukraine. I believe this is an anti-drone drone, just one of the many that they are developing fairly cheaply. And one thing I want to say, Jonathan, at this point, when people think of drones, and well, just drones, but even in Ukraine, they think of aerial drones, which are by far the most that are used to either attack other drones, ballistic missiles, or troops on the ground. However, Ukraine's gone way beyond that. They've got several different classes and models of ground-based or land-based drones, as well as sea-based drones that have been in the news recently, taking out oil platforms in the Black Sea, attacking the bridge at Kerch. Here is a land-based drone, an infantry fighting vehicle in Ukraine. And recently, several squads, several units of the Russian invading army in Donbass have surrendered to this guy, as well as others. They hold up big, notes in Russian saying they want to surrender. And through the operator here, this guy, the machine gun, leads them back to Ukrainian lines. I think that's incredible. It's embarrassing for the Russians, but who cares? But that's the level that they're at right now with air, land, and sea drones, to the point that they are now the main supplier to these weapons platforms to the Middle East. And America, Jonathan, has been cut out of the deal.
Yeah, this is it. And perhaps not aware to the extent it's cut out of the deal. Now, I mean, that's not to say there aren't risks, though. I mean, there are still risks of Ukrainian tech being co-opted,
Sure.
being copied, being stolen, being strong-armed out of Ukrainian hands. But I think what we understand now is that the lead times are so short, the evolution so quick, that actually Ukraine could lose out in the interim, in the short term, by having other countries emulate, steal, copy their tech. But actually, if you don't copy the ecosystem that produced it, that's not going to do you much good. You may have a couple of weeks or a couple of months of advantage, but it does not give you long-term commercial benefit to simply take a bit of IP and produce it. What you need to do is to produce the ecosystem. And to do that, you need the culture of innovation. To do that, you need, I would say, the Ukrainian system, which is highly innovative and is working to drive down unit cost. You need a totally different ethic and procurement process. So I'm not so worried about the long-term future, even if there's going to be some little bumps in the road. But the US, I think, will struggle to absorb the logic of rapid iteration, extreme rapid iteration, tackling bureaucracy, and of course, reducing the role of tech primes within this procurement system.
Good points. And it's taken a long time since the end of the Soviet Union and Ukraine's new independence to come to this situation because they inherited the Soviet system, not just of of corruption, but of centralized government, of centralized procurement and research and development. So it's taken them a while, but you're right. Now they have what used to be a very successful American type of a system, entrepreneurial system, where people, Ukrainians, are getting into the defense industries and are able and encouraged by the Ukrainian government to do their own research and development with funds when it's available, but to go think outside the box, not just depend on Kyiv to tell them what to do. And it's become very successful. As always, I have a couple of brief clips about that, about exactly what we're talking about. If you can just give me a moment here, I'll play
Cue it
one
up,
of them, or maybe both of them, but they're self-explanatory, but watch them. They're about a minute and a half.
A Patriot missile costs $3 million. The drone it's shooting down costs $35,000. Ukraine figured out a better way. This week, they're bringing it to the Gulf. President Zelensky announced that 3 fully equipped Ukrainian teams are deploying this week to Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. Their mission: teach the Gulf how to hunt Iranian drones the way Ukraine learned how to hunt them over Kyiv. I've watched this evolution with my own eyes, literally from the window of my hotel room in Kyiv. The tracer fire of truck-mounted machine guns firing into the night sky. Soldiers waiting for a Shahed to fly almost directly overhead. They had to be in the right place at the right time. Short range, visual range. It worked, but it didn't scale. In Kyiv alone, they could never have enough teams with trucks to protect everyone and everything. The result: critical infrastructure regularly clobbered. The breakthrough is this: instead of waiting for a drone to come to you, you send a drone to hunt it. Interceptor drones in the parlance. $3,000 to $5,000 each, faster than a Shahed, and they chase. Today, 70% of Shahed drones downed around Kyiv are killed this way. The same Iranian drones terrorizing this region have been terrorizing Ukraine for years. Ukraine learned to stop them the hard way. The Gulf is about to get the shortcut. Jason Bellini, Scripps News Group, Tel Aviv, Israel.
$3,000 to $5,000. That's it, as opposed to the multi-million-dollar Patriot missiles, THAAD missiles, and other anti-ballistic and anti-drone weaponry and technology previously supplied by America. That's staggering. It's totally changed the way we fight wars, or at least Ukraine fights wars, because America's still, and Europe, very, very far behind. But that, to me, is an exact example of Ukrainian entrepreneurship, their innovation, and what they have been able to do. Especially, Jonathan, I think in the last 2 or 3 years, they've come light years from where they were.
And the last year has accelerated, clearly. You know, There's been a lot of trial and error, a lot of testing. And it's interesting speaking to people on the ground. So it's going live this evening. I got a long interview with Dr. Jade McGlynn, who has very close connections with several units, including some of the best drone units. And it's kind of interesting. What she says in that interview is that there's a lot of Western-made drones procured specifically for the Ukraine war and shipped to Ukraine as part of Western military aid efforts. That includes US equipment, it includes European equipment, which frankly, once it reaches the front, once it works its way through the European procurement process, is not fit for purpose. It hits the front, it's out of date, it's never even deployed because it's not going to achieve any results, and it's going to be a danger to the people operating it. They know that instantly when they see it. Very few of those drones can be adapted or used again. They tend to be much more of a sort of black box, so you can't sort of hack the hardware and the software to iterate them and recycle some of the components. So there are many thousands, if not tens of thousands, of Western drones that cost an absolute flipping fortune, basically sitting in sheds and dump piles. However, she also said that there are some Western drones which are welcomed and are in use and prove to be effective. So it's not universal. The majority maybe is not just lessons not learned, but what we have to get out of is this mindset that no, we've done our thing because we spent some money on something and we did this and we tick a box. No, you have to follow end to end. Was that thing effective? Was that thing as effective as the Ukrainian equivalent? Did it, how many enemies did it destroy? How much land did it liberate? How did it hold the line? You have to have real KPIs that feed back to that procurement process and that administrative military development process. This is where it's lacking, is that Western governments are not that interested in learning. They're not actually that interested in hearing the truth. As long as we've spent our money and done our thing, great. We can tell our electorates that it's job done. This is fighting a war in a performative fashion. And unfortunately, our deterrence towards Russia, our deterrence posture is just the same. It is performative. Ukrainians see through it, but unfortunately, Russians see through it as well. And the point that Jade made is we're idiots if we don't think that Russia actually has eyes on our procurement process. We're idiots if we think that Russia doesn't understand the majority of Western drone kit. Not all, because apparently some is great. And some countries are learning. She quoted Britain, Denmark, amongst those who actually seem to be learning some of the lessons. But Russia will see what we're spending, what we're providing, and we'll see whether it's deployed or not. And they also will have either secondhand through observation or through stealing the data. They will understand that the majority of Western kit does not work. And they will therefore understand the extent to which we are undefended and our systems are broken and incapable of building an effective defense.
Well, you're right. I mean, in the case of America, the United States, for example, we are slowly, unfortunately, starting to transition to unmanned weapons platforms, drones, and other unmanned systems. However, the biggest problem in the United States in terms of defense and weapons procurement is, of course, money. They are not interested, for the most part, defense contractors, in things that only cost $3,000, $50,000, $100,000. They're looking at multi-billion-dollar systems. That's what they're interested in, which is why we continue to build F-35s, F-22s. The new one, I think, is the F-47 that's not going to be available, if ever, till at least the late 2020s, maybe 2030. And all these other exotic, very, very expensive weapons platforms and things like drones that actually work, and anti-drone systems and platforms are way, 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 way down on the scale, on the totem pole, because they're not worth that much money. They don't bring the defense contractors that much money. And if people don't believe that, then they don't know the American defense procurement system. That's exactly what it is. I mean, look, we're the country of the, I forget what it is, the $100,000 or $1 million toilet that went into aircraft, the American Air Force long-range aircraft. So, and multi tens of thousands of dollar wrenches, things like that. No, unless it costs a lot of money, obscene amounts of money, defense contractors are not interested in that. Although I have to say, as far as Europe goes, and specifically Germany, Jonathan, they really are starting to get the message. Too slow, but they're starting to get the message. I think they've got almost $250 million or a $200 million defense budget, which for them is astronomical. But here's the kicker. Even though they're really expanding their defense budget and they want to expand the Bundeswehr, they don't expect to reach their targets until 2035. 2035. They could all be speaking Russian by that time. I mean, again, these types of situations, central planning or not taking it seriously, is still mind-boggling to me.
This is it. And this is an interesting point here. So I'll bring it up on the screen because I think it's one worth addressing. So we already have drones that are more advanced than Ukraine, and the Department of Defense does not want the Russians to get them to be used outside of the Scout Works. Now, I've heard this from several sources as well, that the US has a history. Maybe they've missed the boat a little bit at certain periods or not seen drones as strategically important. It's a little bit like the Air Force not being developed prior to the First World War so much, or taking a long time for the military in Britain, let's say, to see the benefits. But once those benefits come in, it starts to cascade pretty quickly. So I've heard this story here. My point would be they may be technologically more advanced, but unless they're battle tested, Unless they're stress tested in Ukraine, you cannot say they're more effective. Unless you have the KPIs to demonstrate their actual kill rate, the validated hits and strikes, and the videos of the kills, which is what Ukrainian tech has to provide. Those kills are not attributed to the tech unless there's a clear, unambiguous video showing what they have had an impact on. Technological advancement is all very well, but unfortunately, that means squat unless you have the KPIs and data to show that, one, they're effective and battle tested, not in Estonia or Europe, but actually in the field of battle, and whether the uptake by Ukrainians is high, i.e., once you get into the front, you can use them. And also, what you now need to demonstrate, I think, is not just that they are advanced, but they have built-in adaptability, that actually the platform you've created is part of an ecosystem that can evolve week in, week out, and you've got the ecosystem to develop that tech. So I take a little bit, I don't know if that's not the case. Maybe this is the case, and those things are developing too. But I have to say, just advanced tech is not going to cut it. You need the proof points, and you need the flexibility to iterate. And unfortunately, Ukraine is the only place in the world right now where those things come together.
And I will point out, I must say, the United States, the U.S. Army, the military in general, is concentrating more, is focusing finally on drones and unmanned weapons platforms. I just read recently, I think it was in the Army Times here in the United States, about how many units now are focusing on that, how they're training their soldiers from entry level on up on how to use drones. They're giving them experience, but again, here in the States, not in any combat situation. So it's not as good as can be, but we are in America trying to catch up with drone warfare. But I have to say, it's too little and it's too late. We're still spending too much money on developing and refurbishing armor, new tanks, like I told you about the F-22s and F-35s and F-47 and all these multi-billion-dollar platforms, all of which we need, some of them. But we should be focusing primarily on transitioning to what's actually working in the world, in Ukraine, in the Middle East, drones, unmanned weapons platforms. And in the United States, Jonathan, that's still not happening, not fast enough anyway.
Yeah, that's it. And it makes me wonder, again, this conversation with Jade is, will any of this happen unless there are drones falling on our heads, quite literally? I mean, it seems that it will only be under those circumstances that due attention is actually paid to them. So what else have I missed in the last week? We've got a 10 minutes or so left. What have I missed over the last week that we would have covered if we'd been recording?
Oh my dear God. I mean, everything seems to focus on Trump. I think the main things that's, as far as I can tell here, is everything, all the fallout from the war in Iran. There's been a lot of economic stories about how this is affecting everyone, how that this is not just an oil situation, where it's not just how the price of gas at the pump is going up, how the long-term agony from the war in Iran is going to affect everyone, not just even in the Western world, in America and Europe, but in Asia, everywhere, because of the fact that as of today, still, Iran controls the Gulf. They are still asking or demanding that each vessel pays about $2 million to pass the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, the latest development, if you can call it that, in the so-called negotiations, that Iran is asking or telling America they want to go back to the day before the war and have status quo, to just set everything back, no new demands, just the way it was before, and they'll call it a day. If that happens, I can't think of a more humiliating resolution to the war than to have everything set back to the way it was after how many billions and billions of dollars were spent bombing Iran. The Americans that were killed, the Iranians that were killed, including the school children and other people, the decimation of civilians in Iran, and Lebanon, which, Jonathan, is still going on. That's the other story. Israel has renewed their attacks, their bombing, their devastation of Lebanon, and again called for all Lebanese in southern Lebanon to evacuate. The what's called the Greater Israel program is in full swing, where they intend to annex basically most of Lebanon, the Golan Heights, and I forget what else, Gaza, of course, and the Sinai. This is all part of the Greater Israel program, which America got sucked into in this war. So there's been a lot of stories related to that. And again, the fallout economically and diplomatically of the war in Iran. That's pretty much what I can remember anyway.
And of course, previous presidents have resisted being dragged into this. It's not that this plan is necessarily new. It's been espoused by the radical right and the more sort of religious forces, and many of those who came from the Soviet Union. The plan isn't a secret, but it has not been championed really by U.S. administrations until now. Does Trump even really understand the plan, or does he just not care?
He doesn't care. And, and I have to say, there's been so many analysts that are far smarter than me, which most people would say are most of them, that have talked about this and said that the only reason Trump went into the war, the reason we're still in the war, is because he's being led around by the nose by Netanyahu, that this is Israel's war. And I kind of have to believe that, Jonathan. We, America, aren't really getting anything positive out of this, despite what Hegseth or Rubio says. It's nonsense. All we've done is deplete our precision weapons supply, spent just an obscene amount of money, had American servicemen and women killed, and devastated our economy to the point where we don't even know what's going to happen in the future with inflation or what have you. No, he doesn't understand it. I think he's literally doing what he's doing because Netanyahu is asking him to do that. He doesn't have an understanding of diplomacy or economics or military strategy or tactics or certainly history. He doesn't know what Iran is. He doesn't know what Persia was. No, he doesn't understand any of that. I really, really think he's doing what Netanyahu is asking him to do. And I'm a fan of Israel before people call me an anti-Semite. I am not a fan of Netanyahu. I think there's two different things when you talk about Israel, the Israeli people, and Netanyahu. And I think Netanyahu is bad for Israel, and he's certainly bad for America.
And we should point out there have been extensive protests against Netanyahu in Israel. He's not universally popular there, and nor are his policies. That gives some hope. But what I think we've failed to recognize is that Netanyahu fits into the image of the transactional, grifting populist politician. In fact, along with Erdogan, he pioneered it. In fact, he was a populist before Putin took on that mantle and became more of a nationalist. Before Trump, they were both sort of building this model out before Trump, and they are to some extent the template for the populists that have followed. And therefore, I think we struggle because we still try to look at Netanyahu in more, traditional political terms. We look for the rationale, whereas what we need is a different framework, a new framework to look at populists who will do things that are not in the interests of their own population. They'll do things that are not economically rational. And the sum total of their decisions will be far more guided by retaining office and preventing them going to jail or having legal processes against them, investigations against them. It's a far more, let's say, narcissistic, solipsistic kind of politics, which primarily is focused on their own power, enrichment, and longevity. And I think it's in that lens we have to look at Netanyahu. He's now getting, we'll close on this one, because this is interesting where this is going. He has now bumped up against Ukraine, who I think are championing a new kind of politics, which is a no BS politics, a no delusion, to use the title of your channel, a no delusion, no hypocrisy politics, where you do not do things and say things just because they're performative. You do things because they're effective, and do things because they're right. And you make mistakes, and then try to rectify them and have some accountability to your people. Ukraine is now looks like it's going to be the first country from the Western Alliance to put proper sanctions on Israel. Why? Because Israel has been taking grain from Russia, stolen grain, and happily importing it, which is an absolute criminality. Not only is it taking stolen materials, it is supporting a war effort of a genocidal dictator. And again, in the conversation with Jade earlier, she was saying, well, look, grain is getting the headlines now and it may trigger sanctions, but this has been going on for some time. Israel has been importing sunflower oil produced in the occupied territories by what is essentially a hostage slave population. And they've been happily importing this at below market price, sold by Russia to fund the war effort. So Israel, Israeli leadership are doing criminal things to their own benefit, and they're behaving like grifting populists. I think we have to understand that. Finally, someone is calling it out, and it's Ukraine.
Well, let me close with these thoughts. I just recently spoke with Ken Harbaugh, and I'm going to echo some of what he said here briefly. And that is, we are dealing right now with a president in the United States and a leader of Israel, Netanyahu, both of which cannot be trusted with anything, but certainly cannot be trusted with their nuclear arsenal. And he was actually afraid that not only would Trump consider or even order the use of a nuclear weapon, but that he would find some generals enough within the chain of command to carry out that order. And as far as Israel is concerned, I have no doubt that if Netanyahu gave that order, he would have enough senior military personnel to carry out that order. And I fear that if this war goes on too long enough, that very possibly Israel would consider that, especially if they think that that's an existential battle, that somehow, whether economically or through pressure from Russia, Iran, that they are not going to survive, at least under the government that's there now, then Netanyahu would absolutely consider the use of a nuclear weapon. And I do not trust Trump not to do the same thing. And I'll be very honest with you. At this point, I'm not sure that the American chain of command would stop him. I pray they would. I believe they would. I've done many podcasts about how I still trust in the leadership of America's military. But at this point, Jonathan, I'm just not so sure.
I mean, this was a point made on Twitter, I think, very effectively, is that the world is wary of the US as a former ally and a trading partner now, not just because of Trump, but simply because it's now being shown that there are no real checks and balances to this massive overreach and gathering of powers behind someone who is inconsistent and prepared to engage in extreme illegality and be abusive of partners. It's not just that this is Trump and this is how he behaves, but there are no systemic checks and balances on others behaving in that way. Therefore, I think, long after Trump, countries that have any, let's say, institutional memory of these years are going to have to distance themselves from the US, because it's been shown that the system is not working in terms of curtailing power and abuse of power.
And that's already happening with the recent meetings in Europe, with the EU, with NATO, even in countries in Asia and the Pacific. They are cutting their ties with the United States. They are finally realizing in public that Trump is not and never will be a reliable partner in anything, whether it's military, diplomatic, or economic. And they're cutting their ties. America truly is alone. It's not just America first, it's America all alone. And that, to me, is extremely sad and extremely dangerous.
That's where we're going to have to wrap it up. I think that's a very important place to conclude the conversation. And, look forward to speaking tomorrow, of course.
Yeah, you all take care, stay safe. And as I always tell you, try to stay sane.
That's the real trick in the times we're living in. Yep. See you tomorrow.